school. Universities got off to a rocky start this year as students protested over challenges of registration, financial exclusion and vaccine mandates. The rising student debt continues to pose a real threat to the higher education in the country. Here to talk to us about this and more, I'm joined now by the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela. You can be a part of the conversation tonight by sending us your questions and comments. 072-110-5584. That's the number to dial or tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Deputy Minister, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and making it through. I know it's, you still have that scratch, but I'm sure you'll get over it.
Yeah, no, definitely, and thank you very much for having me today.
Let's start with that hard-hitting statement. I mean, it's very, very, very sharp from the South African Union of Students, saying there is perpetual paralysis at the Department of Higher Education, barring the improvements that they are seeing as far as the NSFAS system is concerned, but saying a large number of your agencies are riddled with incompetence and impunity. I mean, immediately, how do you respond to that kind of a statement?
Look, firstly, I think that's not true. We think that, comparatively speaking, we have done quite well. Firstly, in consistently engaging with the student movement and in taking them along as it relates to the policies that, and the guidelines that we have put in place for this year's registration process. Yes, there have been challenges at the beginning of the year with the shortfall from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. There's also been some administrative glitches on the part of the NSFAS. Some students couldn't know their status, some are still waiting for appeal, but all of those things have now been resolved, so the ball is in motion. And I think it's quite unfair because, I mean, I've had engagement with the university students, South African university students, and broadly with students representatives, and also the minister did have a meeting with them. And in both meetings, we had agreed that yes, there are challenges, but most of the challenges that they were raising were challenges which they were meant to resolve in engaging with management on campuses. And we have always been emphatic that there are certain issues which are not about central policy, but which are about specific institutional policies. And where there is a need, will obviously come in, but we do not think that at this moment, some of the challenges that were confronted at a local level are as a result of the weaknesses at a national level, because those issues we have resolved with the student movement.
Yeah. At the center of these issues, of course, we'll get into the more specifics, but at the center of it is exactly this issue that you're raising. They're saying, as a department, you're failing to coordinate the activities of the various institutions, for example, to be in alignment when it comes to how we deal with previous student debt and whether or not there should be a blanket suspension of exclusion of students based on registration fees. I mean, is this something that's within your purview that you can have influence on and that you're not doing anything about?
Look, it's not something that's within our purview. Firstly, we have worked with institutions and with students to resolve the student debt, which was as a result of administrative issues between the NSFAS and the universities and the students. It could have been because students didn't provide sufficient information. It could be that the universities have failed to provide NSFAS with adequate proof and all of that. Now, that component of the student debt has been resolved. Now, the bigger component of the student debt is those students who are self-paying. I mean, one of the universities the Valley University of Technology is, for instance, close to 600 million in terms of student debt. And if you look at that and whether an institution can operate or not, it's actually almost impossible in the overall student debt from self-paying students amount to anything between 5 and 6 billion rand, which we want to encourage universities and specific students to come to terms and agreement as to how that is going to be resolved. And in many instances, those students were better performing, meaning their results were better. Universities were willing to continue to have them, in their institution. The biggest contention that we have with universities, which the minister has addressed with them, that those students who complete their qualifications and still owe the university should be given their university transcript so that they can go and look for a job, and so that they can be able to come back and pay their university. But it makes it impossible if we're going to encourage a situation wherein there is no commitment on the part of students as to when, and parents, as to when and how they're going to pay, particularly those students who fall outside of the purview of, of the NSFAS. About 2-3 years ago, a grant was made by, the then Minister of Higher Education, Naledi Pandor, to all universities to try and address the question of student debt. And it seems to be accumulating more and more. And I think this is one issue that we'll have to, deal with it. Otherwise, universities will have to collapse. If one university has a student debt of 600 million, it essentially means that that university will not be able to pay their electricity, will not be able to, pay all the other services that they're expected to do. But where we sympathize with, students is particularly those who've already completed, and we think consideration has to be made, by the university in agreement with the students. My worry, and this is, I think, the general worry that we have, within the higher education sector, there is, a call that we need to be intervening in each and every crisis that is there in institutions. And this call is mainly from the student movement. Yes, we understand that certain universities may flirt with abusing the autonomy that they have. And in those instances, the minister has made it very clear that we're going to work with universities so that there's amicable solutions to those crises. But I think students, particularly the students' movement, should always remember that intervention from central government does not necessarily mean that it would be in their favor. And that's why we believe that engagement by all social partners in an institution, the students, the workers, and the university management, has to be reached. And we've seen that today at UKZN. We've seen that in UCT and in many other institutions where management sat around the table with students, and they've managed to come out with solutions to some of the challenges that they've been faced with without interference or intervention from the department or the ministry.
Let's talk about those issues then that many are saying are within your purview. One of them is the funding and the defunding of particular programs. A big issue about the defunding of the postgraduate certificate of education, right? And institutions have said, look, it's not our problem, it's the NSFAS problem. NSFAS says, no, it's not our problem. The funding and the defunding of programs, that's a policy decision that purely sits with the
No. I mean, we had to make that policy decision when government introduced fee-free higher education, that certain postgraduate studies, we had to discontinue funding them. And yes, some of the issues are still before the courts, particularly the funding of LLB qualifications. But for instance, students mentioned the postgraduate diploma on education, which is covered under Funda Rushaka, and some institutions also give students grants who are performing well, but who do not have the funding. But what we've taken a decision on is that if we were to fund students from their undergrad up to PhD, all students who want to do that. And remember, the demand now is becoming higher because most students want to, if they graduate with their undergrad and can't find employment, they want to continue studying. It means that it is fiscally impossible for us to be able to accommodate everyone who wants to go and study in higher education institutions. So we've encouraged universities to do that. We have also have the National Research Foundation, which is also doing that, and a whole range of other agencies, our sector education and training authorities. Some of them have set aside funding for postgraduate studies. Yes, it is not enough, but we believe that if we give students a foot in post-school education and training institutions, they should be able to, if they want to study further beyond their first degree, they should be able to do that either on their own or through the grants and scholarships that are available elsewhere. I think what is important is for us to note that this year we have 1.1 million students who are going to be studying at universities. 68% of those will be funded by the state. We have more than 500,000 students who are going to be studying at TVET colleges. Almost 90% of those will be funded by the state. This has stretched the national fiscus, and that's why at the beginning of the year, we had to run around looking for funding, insist on reprioritization, so that we're able to cater for all of this. Now, if we expand the mandate of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to include postgraduate students, we do not think that it will be financially sustainable for us to be able to fund all the students who want to enter the post-school education and training sector. And we really appeal for consideration and also for students to be looking at various other sources outside of the state for them to be able to be funded for postgraduate studies.
We'll continue in a moment. The Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela, with us tonight. Live with us tonight here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, the Deputy Minister of Higher Education. In the studio with us, Buti Manamela, responding to some of the challenges within the space of higher education. So going back a little bit to what you're talking about, I mean, if you look at the employment challenges in South Africa and the likelihood and the prospects of employment for somebody with a postgraduate qualification, are we not working backwards here in trying to resolve those issues if we say, well, we will not fund your postgraduate education? Many are out there with degrees that can't find employment. There's no other way unless they go back and they improve on that degree for them to be able to get better chances of actually getting a go at getting employment.
Yeah. Look, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, we would have around the region of close to 200,000 students, if not more, and even more if you include TVET college students who complete their qualifications every year. It could actually be more. Now, if you include all of those, as part of funding for their postgraduate studies, it essentially means that we will have to mobilize a lot more resources. I mean, in 2016, 2017, the state was spending just under 5 billion rand on student funding. That number shot up, and as is now, I mean, we're spending anything between the region of 35 to 42 billion rand on student funding. Now, that's a huge impact on the national fiscus, and this covers all the students' allowances, accommodation, and transport in some instances, food allowances in some instances. So there's a huge burden on the part of the state, which has various other responsibilities for it to be able to cater for. And ideally would want to see that situation wherein students are funded up to when they're saying, look, I'm tired of studying. But also we've got another challenge. I mean, part of the things that the South African Union of Students raised in their statement is the N+ rule, wherein those students who do not complete within the required time of their qualification, they are given an additional year to complete. But what that means is that it's an extra burden on the part of the state. It means you're supposed to do a 3-year degree. You're now doing a 4-year degree. I mean, you're doing that degree now in 4 years. It means we have to fund you more. But it also means we're taking space for someone else who should be joining in the post-school education and training sector. And I think it's one of those issues which we need to resolve in ensuring that we relieve the burden on the part of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. The other thing, Thabo, which I think we should not, the question of unemployment. I mean, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've lost so many jobs, which meant that more and more households, fell within the threshold of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which is 350,000, which means more students went to the NSFAS to say, we want money. So I think all of those factors have to be taken into consideration before we, consider funding postgraduate studies directly from the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. But the package of interventions that are available elsewhere, which I spoke about, we believe creates some form of relief both on the state but also on the students who want to further their studies at postgraduate level. We really need those.
Let's talk a little bit about those other forms of packages that you have available in the spirit of the SONA, that no one should be left behind. Of course, in South Africa, we've got that missing middle that is always left behind in all these interventions. One of the suggestions is that the decision be taken that registration should be cancelled for the missing middle, and it's something that could at least give them access in the interim while they maybe go to the option that is now being made available. You're speaking to financial institutions to be able to fund them, and that is also a process in itself that would have to apply, wait, and registration is going on in that meantime, and you might miss an opportunity to get into the program.
Yeah. Look, it's quite easy to say registration should be cancelled. If you remember with the Fees Must Fall protests in 2018, the then President Jacob Zuma made an announcement that there would be no increase for that year. Now, that cost the state about 2.5 billion rands. That money had to be taken from other sources of income. So when someone says it has to be cancelled, it doesn't mean that someone doesn't have to pay for that, and it usually comes from the pocket of the state. And I think what we should be doing, which is what we've said to the student movement, is that we have a ministerial task team that the minister has appointed on instruction by the president for us to look at the possibilities. I mean, for us to look at how do we sort out the question of the missing middle, and there are a whole range of proposals which I think once the task team is ready and has briefed the minister on those proposals, which includes sourcing money from the private sector to ensure that we are able to fund the missing middle, then those announcements will be made. But as is now, there is no arrangement that is in place, and I think until such time that we're satisfied with the work that the team that the minister has appointed, then we can be able to say this is the direction that we're going. And I think an overrider for that is that in as much as we sympathize with students who do not qualify for the to pay for their tuition fee at universities, we're doing all our best to ensure that whatever alternative model that is presented for them to be able to have access to post-school education and training does not necessarily create a huge financial burden. We are cognizant of the fact that globally, particularly in countries such as the US, student debt is the next bubble that will be blowing, that will be bursting, just as the housing bubble burst a couple of years ago. And our intention with this kind of intervention is that we do not create a chain on the ankles of students, so that they spend the rest of their life paying back. So those are some of the things that are in consideration. I know when the minister made that announcement, some people were saying we taking NSFAS to private funders and all of that. There's a huge distinction between funding that goes to NSFAS, which has now been resolved, and models and intervention for the missing middle.
Yeah. Of course, we have to also deal with the issues of perceived looting of money in the department as well. So if you're saying to students, no, we can't find you because there's not enough, and you're also going to be really clear and demonstrate to students that you're dealing with questions of money that is missing. The National Skills Fund, 5 billion rand loot that has been highlighted by the Auditor General, especially that issue is troubling for the students. How are you addressing it?
Look, there is forensic investigation that is being undertaken. At this point, we cannot conclude without having received that investigation. It's something that's a top priority on the part of the department and also on the part of the minister. And it's something that we believe whoever would be found to have been responsible for any looting of any resources, including the National Skills Fund, that those people are brought to book.
Yeah. What is the challenge at the National Skills Fund and how it is managed? Is it a question of lack of capacity, lack of skills, incompetence, or just sheer corruption?
Well, as I said, I think all of those issues will have to come out from the forensic investigation that is currently underway. What I know is that the team that is investigating this has asked for a bit of an extension, and I think upon conclusion we will know whether the issues were issues around capacity and human capacity or systems capacity, and if anybody is pointed, those people will be dealt with, upon conclusion of that process.
Okay. Let's talk then about the finalization of the guidelines. I think you've mentioned a little bit of the guidelines of NSFAS. When is that process going to be finalized and presented?
Been finalized.
Has it been presented to Parliament?
And the minister has concurred. I think it was on the 14th or 15th of February. They were issued in public. I know that there was a delay, and the delay was that there were a lot of negotiations between the NSFAS and the department. And the reason being that there are certain decisions which we cannot take, particularly those that has financial implications and financial commitments which we cannot meet. And I know that some of the issues included an increase in the student allowances, an increase in accommodation allowances, and a whole range of other issues that had to be negotiated. But finally, there was an agreement, and upon that finalization of the agreement and the issuing of the guidelines, the NSFAS then went ahead to say to institutions, these are the students who qualify for NSFAS, and this is what they qualify for, and that's how the registration process started. And so, as is now, as far as we are concerned, although there have been some concerns that were raised by the student movement, on the guidelines, there is, I think, general consensus that the guidelines are taking us forward. What the minister has said to NSFAS now is that we need to now start early with the negotiations for the guidelines into the future, so that this delay, which had an impact on the registration process, can be averted. But also, we can now confidently say that those institutions which were affected by the issuing of the guidelines, most of them have agreed to extend the registration process because they're cognizant of the fact that it was not the students who were at fault, with regards to the delay in registration. And some of them have extended registration period to as late as the 11th of March. And have put in place measures for students to be able to catch up, those who were locked out, of the system. So we're quite confident that no one will be left behind as a result of the delay in the issuing of the guidelines, but also as a result of the challenges that we're confronted with at the NSFAS, which was mostly systems glitches. And I really hope that, some of the challenges that we're confronted with in our campuses, that there would be calm. In fact, we're quite confident that in general, most of the institutions are calm. Lessons have resumed. Where there have been challenges, some of those, have come up with agreements between students, management, and everybody else. And where there isn't, we are encouraging university managements to engage with their SRCs. I know that there are students at the University of QwaQwa Free State who were left stranded precisely because there was disagreement in terms of the registration process, particularly returning students. And we've said to the University of Free State, please ensure that those students whom there are still issues with their registration, don't throw them to the street. Find alternative accommodation, for those students. It is obviously going to be a challenge. A system that was built to accommodate around 400,000 students about 10 years ago is now having a pressure to accommodate about 1.1 million students.
Yeah.
There has been, of course, new infrastructure that has been built. There are resources poured into the system to build more new infrastructure to cover the challenges of accommodation and any other, shortfall that we may have. But we do not think that it is humane for any university or any TVET college to have students, sleeping on the street without consideration of the need for alternative accommodation for those until those issues that they may have with the university, have been resolved.
Deputy Minister, fortunately we're out of time, but we appreciate you coming through.
Thank you so much
for your time. That's the Deputy Minister there of Higher Education, Buti Manamela.